Okay, so here we have our main frames. They're pretty much in their two separate halves pre-assembled. Most of the screws in here are screws into plastic, so you don't actually need to take them back out again. The notable exceptions to that are the bearing blocks here, which are metal, but we don't actually want to do those up tight yet, not until we've installed our main mast, and then we can tighten those. Otherwise these can end up out of alignment and it makes the mast not run true within the bearing blocks. One thing I do need to do is just take a screw out the back here and just see if there are metal inserts inside the plastic gearbox or not, so I'll just do that. Yeah, having dropped one of these screws out the back here, these are in fact into a metal insert that is inside this clamp here. So when we put the tail boom in, we will need to Loctite these as well, because there is a metal insert inside the plastic in there. But at this stage we don't need to do that. The thing we're going to do at this point is build up our frames into one frame set, so that we've just got a single frame to work on. Okay, so in the box you'll find a bag labelled 450HB5, and this actually contains all the bits we need to build those frames up. So I'm going to empty the contents out here, and then we can do this a piece at a time. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to start with in preparation for putting up our frames is the motor mount. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to install the motor onto the motor mount before we actually install the motor mount into the frames. And the reason I'm going to do that is because it can be a bit difficult getting to the screws that you mount the motor with once the mount is in the frames. But whilst you've got it out the frames, it's really easy to work on. So we can just loosely install the screws and get the motor onto the mount, and then later on all we've got to do is set the mesh. Of course we want to install the pinion as well. So you'll find all the screws and washers and stuff to do this inside the bag with the pinion in it, and we just literally got to slip the pinion onto the shaft. We don't really need to set the height of the pinion at this point, just get it, you know, on the shaft and sort of near enough. I tend to put them on until they're flush with the top of the pinion, like that, so the shaft is flush with the top of the pinion, and that's normally about right. It might need a tiny bit of adjustment, but it should be enough. And then we can install the motor into the mount as well, and there's a little grub screw for holding the pinion onto the motor. One thing to note is that the motor doesn't have a flat on the shaft, so you may want to use a Dremel or a file and just file a little flat spot on the motor shaft there for the grub screw to pinch up against. Okay, so there we have our motor installed into the motor mount, and that's ready to be installed into the frames now. So that's the next thing I'm going to do, is put that into the frames, and we can have a look at what that looks like. Okay, so here we have the motor mount now installed into the lower frames, and all I've done is secured it at the back with these two rearward screws. And the next thing that happens is the upper frame. See, there's a slot here in the motor mount, and this is where the upper frame comes down through the motor mount, and then the screws go all the way through the upper frame and into this inner piece and hold the upper frame onto the motor mount. So try and demonstrate this. Let's try and do this on the camera. There we go, so that's inserted through the motor mount there, and then the screw goes all the way through the outer frame like that. And all the way through and into the inner frame, sorry, the inner side of the motor mount, and that then holds it in place. So you can see where that's gone through there, and that's pivoting now where I've installed that. Okay, so I need to take that out and Loctite it obviously, but one in this side, one on the other side, and then that's the top of the frames held in place, and then we can work at the back of the frames here to put the rear support in for the frame. So at the moment we're just pivoting on the front there, installed that on the front. Next thing is to work on the back. Okay, so next we're going to try and secure the back of the frames here, and for that you have one of these things here, and I'm actually holding this the way it needs to go in. So there is a sort of a slot along the top which goes towards the top of the frames, and this inserts underneath here like that, and then there is a cutout which it locates into, and then you'll find that everything is then flush. There's no sticky out bits, so you know it's in the right way once everything is, you know, orientated nice and flush. And then we need to put some screws through here to secure it, and do the same on the other side. Okay, now to secure this in place, we use these long button-headed screws, and in fact you are screwing through into metal. In the upper frames here there's a metal insert that these screw into, so once again we need to apply Loctite to these long button-headed screws. Okay, and then once you've done that, you should end up with something like this, and it's actually taken on quite a rigid frame set now. It's quite difficult to cause any bend in the frames. They are really quite stiff once you put that together, so much better than the original T-Rex SE V2 frames. Really a much stiffer frame set. Okay, so there are some other pieces that can be installed into the frames, and we may in fact need to just slacken off these bolts at the back here to do it. One is a little tray that goes in the back here. We've also got the anti-rotation slider, which has got to go on the top, and we've got the canopy posts to go on as well. So as I say, to get this radio or rear gyro mount in, we may need to just slacken these bolts off a little tiny bit whilst the Loctite is still wet, and just slip that in and then put a couple of screws into it. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. Okay, so I did slacken off these two screws, and that allowed me just to insert the rear gyro mount onto the back of the helicopter there, and also at the top of the frames here I've just put the anti-rotation slider on there and put the self-tapping screws in to hold that in place. And the last thing we need to do is to install the canopy posts in the rear positions of the bearing blocks here, and the way these work is that you've got, I'll just bring these out, you've got a canopy post, and then you've got this single kind of long threaded rod, and basically you put that on your Allen key like so, put some Loctite on here, and then thread that into the end of the canopy post. And I've always wanted to say this, here's one I prepared earlier, and basically once that's in there and Loctited, you just put some Loctite on this piece, and then that can screw into your frames in there like so, and screw that in, and then with pliers or a small spanner you can tighten that up. So I'll put those two canopy posts on. And there we go, there's the canopy posts installed onto the rear side of the main mast blocks there. And that's most of the frame build done. We still need to put an undercarriage on here, and the undercarriage is your typical built-up undercarriage. Let's grab it over here. Here we go. Here's our undercarriage, and this is just a simple case of inserting the pipes through the struts, and then using the various screws to bolt the undercarriage onto the underside of the frames. So So I'll just build this undercarriage up, and then just before we put it onto the frames we can have a look at that, and then I'll bolt it onto the frames.